Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. We dedicated Torah study for salvation for Am Yisrael, Shemir for the Chayalim, Hatzalah for the Shuyim, and we're going to discuss the passage of Shelach. So, yesterday when we were studying this as part of our Rashi studies, we ended on a verse which was fascinating. And I wanted to focus on that and see the Hasidic commentaries, explanations of this verse. So let me just give you the background, but we're in chapter 13, verse 16. Chapter 13, verse 16 of the book of Bamidbar, which is Shelach. And the background is that Moshe sends out he gathers up the men, and it says, Kulam Anashim, they were distinguished people, to send them out to spy out the land. And it lists all their names. And the assumption is that these people were very dignified people, and their names are all of tremendous significance. And in fact, the Gemara, and it lists all their names. And in fact, the Gemara in Sota says that we have a tradition that these Meraglim, their names are associated with Satur, the son of Michael, and he's called Satur, means to say that he thwarted, that he tried to contradict the actions of God. The son of Michael, that he made himself basically mach. Basically, he tried to weaken God's power. That he said he made God's power weak. That God can't stand before those who live in the land. And he says they're too strong for us. So that's his name, Situr ben Michael. That's the only name we know its significance. Says the Gemara in Sota 34b, according to Rabbi Yitzchak. But then Rabbi Yochanan came along in the Talmud and said, also we know about the meaning of the name Nachbi ben Vavsi. Nachbi means that he tried to conceal the words of God, and Patsi, that he skipped over the attributes of God, meaning to say that he tried to limit God's actions. So these are the only two names, according to Talmud and Sota, that we know of. However, then the next couple verses later, it states, Vayikra Moshe Hoshea ben Nun Yoshua, that Moshe selected, of all the names, of all the people he selected, the one he selected also was Joshua, the son of Nun. But of course, at that point, his name was not Joshua. His name at that point was Hoshea ben Nun, and Moshe called him Yehoshua. Hold on one second. Joshua's appeared in our portion earlier several times. He appears in the book of Exodus. And let me read the passages to remind us of them. It really appears at the end of Parshas Shelach, when the Jewish people went out when Amalek came and attacked the Jewish people. And let me just say this. It says, let me read the exact pasuk. Hold on. It says at the end of the Shelach, it says in chapter 17, and there it says, Amalek came to fight with the Jewish people, and Moshe said to Joshua, Yehoshua. There he's called Yehoshua. Here he's called Hosea, but I thought his name was Yehoshua. So first of all, he's already called Joshua back in Parashat Shelach, and then it refers to him again at Sinai. It says before Moshe went up Sinai, it said that Moshe says that Joshua stayed at the foot of the mountain. Where does it say it? It says, hold on. It says in the pasuk, Well, when he comes down the mountain, it says that Joshua. Hold on one second. I want to cite the exact verse for you. I don't want to. It's in Parshas Kisisa. We have to go to Parshas Kisisa. When Moshe comes down the mountain, it says in chapter 32, verse 17, Joshua heard the sound of the people. And he says to Moshe, he says he hears the sound of the people, meaning that they were making loud noise. And he says to Moshe, I hear the sound of a war in the camp. And he says, no, this is not the sound of strength. It's not the sound of weakness. Basically, I hear a sound of sin. And so basically, Joshua is referred to in these two main incidents in the book of Exodus. And there he's called Joshua. And now in this verse, he's called Hoshea ben Nun and says his name is being changed to Joshua. Why is his name being changed from Hoshea to Joshua? So here too, Rashi cites the Talmud from Tractate Sota, and the Talmud says that what was he asking for? He's saying, Ka, the name of God, Yoshiacha should save you, Meyatzat Miraglim. He was adding that God should save him from the advice, from the counsel of the spies. So this is a very big deal. Let me read to you the commentary of the Torah Tamim on this. I promise you we're going to get to the Hasidic interpretation, but the Torah Tamim asks some very clear questions about this. He says, first of all, it seems that what's this Talmudic text teaching us? It says that Moshe changed Hoshea's name to Joshua because he was praying that God should save him from the counsel of the spies. And so at first glance, it seems what this Talmudic text is saying is that the intent is that Moshe prayed with this language, and his intent was that Hoshea, or now Joshua, should not join to the council of the spies to bring them with them a bad report about the land. But there's a difficulty with this explanation. In fact, there's more than one difficulty with this explanation, because if Moshe knew that the spies were going to give a bad report, then why did he send them? And why did he send this whole thing into motion, which is going to cause huge problems? So that's the first problem. The second problem is, why didn't he pray for all of them to be saved from the council of the spies? Why did he only pray for Joshua or Hoshea? Well, so two problems. One, if he knew it was going to be a problem, why did he send them? And if he said, okay, you're going to have to just do your best, he should have prayed not just for everyone, not just for Joshua, but for everyone. So the Torah Tamima gives an answer, which would not have been my answer, but I'm going to tell you the Torah Tamima's answer. Then I'll give you my answer. Then we'll read the Hasidic answers. The Torah Tamima says, really, Moshe had no idea what the spies were going to say. He didn't know they were going to bring a bad report, but he prayed for Joshua because he knew where Joshua came from, and that's why he was worried that Joshua was going to bring a bad report. Meaning to say, not that he suspected Joshua was stronger and everybody else was going to be through peer pressure trying to get Joshua to go over to their side, but just the opposite. He was worried that Joshua was going to be the bad link, because Joshua came from the tribe of Ephraim. Ephraim was the son of Joseph, and Joseph brought back a bad report about his brothers. It says in Parashas Vayeshev that Joseph brought back Dibatamra el Avihem, that Joseph brought back a bad report to his brothers. So he's worried that this attribute, this character trait of Joseph was going to be living on in Ephraim. As we inherit the character traits of our parents and ancestors. So therefore he prayed specifically for Joshua, because Joshua had this character trait. And Well, what about the fact that so the Torah Tamima recognizes there's another problem with this because Joshua was not the only one from Joseph. Also, it says Gadi ben Susi was from the tribe of Menashe, and Menashe was also a descendant of Joseph. So maybe there it says maybe he recognized this quality or this concern. Either maybe he loved him more because he was his student specifically, or maybe he recognized his character trait uh, um, um, in Joshua more because he saw him more, so he was more concerned about it. And so now the Torah Tamima discusses the question that I raised before, which is how can we find in several places in the Torah he's called by his name Joshua, even though that was before his name was changed. We don't find this by Avram. Avram's name was changed from Avram to Avram. And before the name change, he's called Avram. And after he's called Avram. Sarai, your name is Sarai, and then changed to Sarah. Before her name is changed, she's called Sarai. After it's changed, it's called Sarah. It's only actually Jacob, whose name is changed to Israel. And even after his name is changed, then we also still sometimes refer to him as Israel and sometimes as the Jacob. So we have to say, the Torah Tamima says, that he was always called Yehoshua, and he was called that in the book because we know that, meaning say, the Torah refers to him as Yehoshua because the Torah obviously is being written after. It wasn't written exactly contemporaneous with the events. It was written after the events happened, and it was written after this event happened. And so therefore, Torah is recorded to say, basically saying his name based on what it was changed to. And so that's what the Torah Tamima says. I have a different thought about it, and before I get into the Hasidic answers, I just want to give to you my thought about it. My thought comes from the fact. Hold on one second. Let me just find the passage. Hold on. Let me show you this. 1 second. Okay, probably the easiest way I can show this to you is from the first book of Joshua. Let me just pull it up here. Hold on, I have it right here. There we go. Okay. It says that after Moshe died, and God said to Joshua, and he calls him as a Misharet Moshe, that he was the Misharet, he was the servant, he was the attendant. That's the name by which Joshua is known as. He's known as the one who is the attendant. And so, what kind of name is that for a leader? I mean, he's not called Joshua the bold, Joshua the dynamic. He's called Joshua the attendant. And so it's possible that Moshe Rabbeinu viewed Joshua, and sometimes we see this in our own students and maybe in our own children. We see them as very obedient, and we're not sure that they have the ability to be dynamic and bold. And so therefore, Moshe was concerned, especially about whether or not Joshua was going to be the one who's dynamic and bold. Even when they come back here in this story, Kalev is the one who's the charismatic leader. It says Vayaz Kalev Esam. Kalev is the one who who quiets the people. So he's not sure that Joshua has it within him to be the one who can lead the people. And so therefore he was worried that Joshua specifically would be somebody who would maybe fall to peer pressure. And so therefore Joshua specifically was one who he was concerned about, and therefore he had to pray specifically for him that he would have the strength to withstand the challenge of people who might be critical of the land. And there's other evidence that Moshe himself was worried about Joshua. But first, let me take a pause for a moment and take a question, and I'll show it to you. The question is, did Moshe know that Joshua was going to be his successor? So for that, we have to turn to our Torah. And at this point, all the evidence shows that he did not realize Joshua was going to be a successor. What's the proof? The proof is, it states, there's another example where it said in last week's portion, first of all, that Joshua, when they come and prophesize, and Joshua, in first of all, in chapter 11, verse 28, he says, Vayan Yoshua ben Nun misharet Moshe mibachu rav. Joshua, when these all down and made that are prophesying in the camp, Joshua the son of Nun, who is the misharet Moshe mibachu rav, he's the attendant to Moshe from his youth. He says, my master Moshe, destroy them. And Moshe criticized him. He says, no, I'm a kaneh tali. He's like critical of him. He says, you're being jealous for me? And he says, I wish all the people would be the prophets. So it's almost like he doesn't necessarily think that he's leadership material. He's trying to teach him. And what's Joshua called? Misharet Moshe mibacharav. He's like the person who's watching, he's attending to Moshe from his youth. That doesn't mean that he's leadership material. And in fact, the best proof that Moshe doesn't necessarily think Joshua is ready to be the leader is when we go to Parshas Pinchas. In Parshas Pinchas, we see that Pinchas is the one who acts zealously and defends the honor of God and kills Zimri and Cozbi, who were standing in front of the tent. And then it states, chapter 27, verse 16 or 15, Vaidaber Moshe Hashem lemor. Moshe spoke to God, saying, Yifkod Hashem Elokei Haruchol Kol Basar Ishal Edah. Moshe says to God, God, choose somebody over the whole congregation. Asher Yetzei Lifneim, Asher Yavo Lifneim, that will go out before them and come back. Asher Yotzieim, Asher Yavieim. We'll take them out and come back. Let not these people be like a flock without a sheep, like a flock of sheep that have no shepherd. So Moshe says to God, please pick somebody. We need somebody. Hold on, I see I wrote something. Yeah, maybe Joshua was in training from earlier sources, but from chapter 27, verse 16, Moshe doesn't say to God, pick Joshua. He says, find somebody for me to take over for me. Hello? What about the person who's been with you from your youth, who's been right next to you, who's been watching you, and who knows you better than anybody? Why doesn't Moshe select him? And God says, and he says, pick somebody to lead his flock. And so God has to tell Moshe, Vayomer Hashem Moshe, Ka'al chacha et Yoshua ben Nun. Select Joshua. Ish asher ruach bo, the man who has the spirit in him. V'samachtas yadcha alav. Place your hands upon him. So all of a sudden, God tells Moshe, take Joshua. Why does he have to describe Joshua to Moshe? Man who has the spirit. Doesn't Moshe know that Joshua has the spirit? So if we read it with this verse, it makes it sound like Moshe was worried that Joshua was a very good assistant, but he didn't have what it takes to be the dynamic leader. So God says, no, he's got the spirit in him. Ish asher ruach bo, he's got the spirit. And place your hands upon him. Why does he have to place your hands upon him? And then stand in front of Elazar the Kohen, in front of the whole community, and command them with in front of their eyes, and place some of your glory upon him, so that everybody listens to him. And Moshe did this just like God commanded. He took Joshua, he placed his hands on him, just like God had said. So we see from here, I guess what I'm saying is that Moshe must have certainly had some hesitancy, or at least my reading of it is that he wasn't sure that Joshua was going to be, that Joshua was the right person for the job. And that's why, hold on one second. Hold on. Yes, 1 second. I just would like to just share one more classic Talmudic text about the renaming of Joshua, just to put it out there so everybody can not say they heard that they studied Torah about Joshua's name and didn't have this midrash. This actually comes from the Jerusalem Talmud Sanhedrin, the 2nd chapter. Tana Rabbi Oshaya, Yud Shenital Meimenu Sarah, Allah v'nishtatech lefnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'amar. The Yud that was taken from our mother Sarah, because her name was Sarai, and they took that Yud, and it went up before heaven. It was taken away from Sarah's name. It went up before heaven, and it said, Master of the universe, Akartani minat tzedakah minat tzedeket hazos. You took me away from this righteous woman. You cheated me out. I was attached to a righteous woman, and now I'm a nobody. I'm just flying around a letter without a name. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God said, Shelach, calm down. You are in the past at the end of a word, and you weren't as significant. But now I swear to you that I'm going to place you, a warrior, and at the beginning of the word. And that's what it states that Vayikra Moshe ben Nun Yoshua, and he called him Joshua. So what's the purpose, before we go into the naming of Joshua, what's the purpose of this midrash? Is it just I don't even, what do you do with a midrash like this? It seems almost silly. Like there's a yud flying around in heaven and saying, where am I going to go? No, but the Torah Tamima points out that the purpose of this is to show us that every single letter in the world has a place, and everything has a space and a place for it. And even though we might think that there's something insignificant, this little yud, which is the smallest of all the letters, it said it has a place, and it was waiting for its proper place to be applied. And that's the I think what the message of this midrash is. But now I want to go to that question that we asked before. There's focus on this question. Of Moshe calling Joshua by the name Yoshua, or calling Hosea by the name Yoshua. And Rashi's saying, God should save you from the counsel of the spies. So like I said, I wanted to turn to the Hasidic explanations of this, because this is something that the Hasidic rabbis were very, very much inspired by, this passage. And in fact, I have here only 11 explanations of it. 11 comments on this seemingly innocuous verse. So first we start with the prosaic, even though he's anything but a prosaic commentary, he's usually a very mystical commentary. It's a little bit it's a little bit of a mystical answer, but it was just like, he did this. Why did he change his name? You ever hear the idea, Mishaneh Makom and Shaneh Mazal, that if you want to change your fate in life, you change your name, your place, and also your name. This is why if Rahman al-San, somebody's very sick, they often change the name. So they say the decree was on that person but I'm not that person anymore. I have a new name, and that's why I elude the bad decree. And so too, um, what the Baal Turim says that that Joshua was a general in the fight against Amalek, and so everybody knew about him. So he changed his name so that nobody would recognize him, and so therefore he was no longer Hosea, he was now Yoshua. That seems like a little bit of a prosaic answer. He got a new passport to get past the security system. Well, but of course it's from the Baal Turim, so we take it extremely seriously. And the Baal Turim is anything but a prosaic answer. In fact, we started a new shir every Erev Shabbos. I mean, every Shabbos afternoon now, we study the Baal Turim on the Torah, and it's something very powerful. So a second explanation. So comes from the Mea Shiloach. Who's the Mea Shiloach? The Mea Shiloach is the Ishbitzer, Rabbi Mordechai Leiner. I'll just read to you a little bit about him so you know who he is. Hold on one second. Hold on one second. Okay, his name is Rabbi Mordechai Yosef Leiner, known as the Ishbitzer. I've been to his grave in Poland. And let's just read you a little bit of his biography. He was born in Tomashov in 1801. His father, Yaakov, died when he was 2, was a descendant of Rabbi Saul Wall. He became a disciple of Rabbi Simcha Bunim of Peshischa, and he joined the Kotzker, and also were both born in Tomashov. So when the Kotzker Rebbe became his rabbi in Kotz, the Ishbitzer became his student, and then in 1839 he became himself a rabbi in Talmud and then to Ishbitz. And he has some many famous students. Most famous was Reb Tzadok HaKohen of Lublin. Interestingly, since this is a shir in which we're studying Joshua and his relationship to Moshe Rabbeinu, the Ishbitzer himself was the right-hand man of the Kotzker Rebbe, and he was his, like his number one guy. But then he had, in 1840, he had a public fight with the Kotzker. And so he broke away. And that was a very famous fight. Okay. So hold on one second. So, okay. So let's see what the Ishbitzer says here. Says the Ishbitzer, Ha'os Yud, the letter Yud, Romezes Latmimus. It hints to perfection because it is the letter that is the smallest of all the letters. So what do you mean by it? It hints to perfection. There's the smallest amount of ink, and so therefore it's the least possibility for error. So it hints to perfection. And so therefore, why does he add the letter Yud? Why specifically the letter Yud? This is based upon the Mishnah and Kedushin that if a person says to his agent, let's say a person says to his friend, I'm appointing you to be my lawyer. Go out and be my representative in betrothing that specific woman for me. All right, you could do that in those days, like it was, you had to travel. So Reuven says to Shimon, there's a woman there in the other town over. I like to marry her. Give her this like handkerchief as my gift, this diamond, so that she'll be betrothed to me. Okay, and Shimon goes and goes ahead, and he gets to that town, and he sees the girl, and he's like, you know what? I want to marry her myself. And he puts away the handkerchief or the diamond that his client had given him, and he says to this girl, will you marry me? So, and she accepts. So she's going to be betrothed to Shimon and not to Reuven. We don't, even though if a lawyer did that today, he would not be acting ethically. And so too, then, this was not the best way to act, but it was a valid marriage. And the Gemara says, but he acted in a deceitful manner. So therefore, in this case also, there was the concern that we were always worried about, that Joshua was going to take the advice of the spies, but that's not what the concern here is, said the Ishbitzer. There's a different concern. See if you can figure it out based upon the analogy I gave. What's the analogy? If a man sends a person to go betroth a wife for him, and he ends up betrothing him for herself, it's proper betrothal, but he's acted in a deceitful manner. He hasn't acted properly. So how does that relate to Moshe and Joshua? Moshe was saying to Joshua, go and scout out the land for me. And in the end, what's going to happen is Joshua is going to be the one who brought the people into the land. So people might have thought that Joshua acted in an underhanded manner because he was Moshe's number two. And he ends up, as a result of this whole incident, becoming the one to bring the people in. So you might have thought that he didn't act properly. And so therefore Moshe added the letter Yud to emphasize that Joshua was pure with his actions. And so therefore, for this reason, he gave Joshua the Yud to demonstrate that Joshua was really the most humble man on the face of the earth, that Joshua did act, not that Joshua was the most humble man, that Joshua acted with purity and not with artifice and guile, and he did not manipulate the situation so as to enable him to come into the land. And in fact, that's what I said, humility. The Targum Yonasan ben Uziel says that when did Moshe give Joshua the extra letter Yud? When he saw Moshe's humility, that's when he called him Hoshea ben Nun Yoshua. So the Ishbitzer is saying that why did Moshe give Joshua the letter Yud? It wasn't like Rashi said to protect him from the counsel of the spies, but it was to demonstrate that Joshua was not acting in an underhanded manner to arrange a situation so that Moshe would not be able to go into the land, but he acted with purity and without deceit. So that's the one explanation. Then we have another explanation from the Rimanov, Reb Mendel of Rimanov. Okay, let me just tell you who Reb Mendel of Rimanov is so that you can get that one right. Hold on. We have the Ishbitzer, we just did. Now we're doing Mendel of Rimanov. Hold on. Okay, Rabbi Nachman Mendel of Rimanov. So he lived a little bit before the Ishbitzer. He died in 1815, and okay, let's see, he was born in 1745, and he was a descendant from the Balaturim. And he was a student of the Maggid of Mezrich, and he studied under Shmelka of Nikolsburg, and his primary teacher was Reb Elimelech, and he was amongst Reb Elimelech's best students. So therefore, this is basically like our cousin. He was the number one of Reb Elimelech, and we're named after Reb Elimelech. Our yeshiva was named after him. So this is what the Rimanov says. First of all, he quotes the Targum Yonasan ben Uziel that when Moshe saw Joshua's humility, he called him Joshua. And Rashi says he prayed for him that Hashem should save him from the counsel of the spies. So the question is, says the Rimanov, if he was so humble and such a tzaddik, why did Moshe need to pray for him? It seems to be two opposite approaches. If Moshe prayed for him, then maybe he wasn't such a tzaddik. And if he prayed for him, if he was such a tzaddik and so humble, then why does Moshe need to pray for him in the first place? So answers the Rimon of that there's two types of tzaddikim. There's two different types of tzaddikim in the world. There is one who is very strong and dynamic, and the other one who's very humble. These are two opposite types of righteousness. The overwhelmingly dynamic character, and then the person who just carries himself with tremendous humility. So there's one who carries himself with strength and who's a warrior, and then there's one who carries himself with modesty and humility. There's one tzaddik who stands in the gate and argues with strength with the false leaders, and then there's a tzaddik who's just puts his head down and stays in his corner, and he says, "Who am I? Who can I do it?" And so when Moshe saw the humility of Joshua, he was concerned. He says, maybe at that moment, you won't have the strength. They'll be too humble. Say, let me stay in the corner. I don't want to cause a fight. I don't want to argue against them. And so therefore he said that he prayed that Joshua would have the strength to overcome his humility. Meaning to say humility is a very, very dangerous character trait. We need humility, but if we have misplaced humility, we won't be able to stand up to those who are challenging us. And that's what Menachem Mendel of Vermont says. Don't be so humble. The Hasidic masters had this tension. On the one hand, there were some who were just the most humble people. On the other hand, they were also some who carried themselves like a king. Like the Lubavitcher Rebbe, his followers always treated him like a king. Like the followers themselves didn't touch the Rebbe, because he was like a king. You weren't allowed to touch, and that's why like they refer to him as almost like a king. And so therefore, there's this contrast between humility and carrying yourself like the world was created for you. So, okay, another approach is from the Orach L'Chaim. He says when Moshe saw the humility, he called him Joshua. And Rashi says he prayed for him. Hashem should save you. What does the Orach L'Chaim say? He says true humility is not recognizable. And this is what he writes, of course. The true humility, to be humble, is the one mitzvah where if you have intention to be humble, that actually destroys the mitzvah. You can't try to be humble. If you try to be humble, you've clearly failed in your attempt to do the mitzvah, because the truly humble person has no idea that he's humble. The truly humble person has no idea that he's humble. If he thinks he's humble, or if he tries to be humble, then he's obviously arrogant. So the truly humble person has no idea that he's humble. And so therefore, this concept of humility is something that's intrinsic to him, and nobody's even aware of it, including the person himself. And so therefore, when Moshe saw his humility, he thought maybe it's not true. Moshe was worried, since I can see his humility, Moshe was worried that maybe he's not really humble. And so therefore he prayed for him. That's the commentary of the Orach L'Chaim. The Panini Torah says like this. He says, again, he's commenting on the phrase that says that when Moshe saw his humility, Moshe called him Joshua. He said, Panini Torah says, many people struggled to explain this. And you could say that it means is that when Moshe became aware of Joshua's humility, he was concerned that maybe this would weaken him into struggle with the spies. And this is something I was talking about before, that the humble person typically stands at the side and doesn't get involved. And that's what Moshe was worried about. He's worried that he wasn't going to get involved. Not that he was going to say something bad, but that he was just going to say, you know what? I don't need to get involved in this. Let somebody else do this. So he saw that humility could be a very dangerous attribute. If a person is too humble, he's just going to stand at the side and allow things to happen. So that's why it says, he prayed that Hashem should save you from the counsel of the spies. Hashem should give you strength that you can wage war against the spies. This is what it says in the Pnei Torah. Even though humility itself is a great attribute, sometimes we need to destroy the humility and to reveal the strength. We don't always need to be humble. Sometimes we need to destroy the humility and reveal the strength. And he cites the Talmudic text from Gittin 56a, that the humility of Zechariah ben Avkulas caused the destruction of the temple. What's this a reference to? The reference to that the incident with Kamsa and Bar Kamsa was invited to the wedding accidentally, and the rabbis didn't object when his person who when he showed up, who hated him, threw him out. So then Bar Kamsa went, and he wanted to embarrass the Jewish people. So he brought an animal from the emperor, and he said, the Jews really despise you. And he said, I'll prove it to you. He made a blemish, like a cataract, that was not considered a blemish by the Roman emperor, but it was considered a blemish by the Jewish people, meaning to say it would not be a blemish for us, but if this Roman bringing this cataract, he was not able to bring it. So the rabbi said, let's bring it anyway, because otherwise the Roman emperor is going to kill us. And Zechariah ben Avkulas spoke up and said, no, we can't do that because we'll set a terrible precedent. And what will happen? It'll be a slippery slope. And then they said, okay, so let's kill Bar Kamsa so he doesn't go back and report to the emperor. He says, so Zechariah ben Avkulas said, no, that'll also set a terrible precedent. So Zechariah ben Avkulas so the Talmud says there that the humility of Zechariah ben Avkulas, he was unable to take a bold decision. His humility, that's what led to the destruction of the temple and the destruction of our city. And that's what Moshe was worried about Joshua. He was worried that Joshua's humility would cause him to say, let's sit this one out. I'll punt, as they say. I'll punt, and therefore we won't have a problem. Okay, so now, that's what the Pnei Torah says. Another explanation comes from the Alpha Yisrael. The Alpha Yisrael says, when Moshe saw the humility, that he started to pray for him. So the question is, and the question we're discussing, the Alpha Yisrael says, if Moshe saw this tremendous quality of humility, so he's such a tzaddik, that's how Moshe was described. Why did he daven for him? He should have been able to rely upon him more. So the Alpha Yisrael gives a very clever explanation. He says, no, because Joshua was so humble, he was the biggest threat. He was of all the spies, because he wasn't the politician, so to speak. All the other princes, they were considered to be very distinguished men, and therefore he thought nobody was going to believe them if they spoke bad about the land of Israel, because he says they were the princes. They want to remain in their princely role, and so therefore he was concerned. He wasn't concerned that somebody was going to believe him. But when it came to Joshua, there he was worried because people would say, this man is humble. He's not just saying his bad report to stay in his position. He's clearly not interested in power. And so therefore the threat from Joshua was so much more serious than the threat from the spies. That's why he specifically prayed for Joshua to be saved from from giving a bad report. Okay, they'll stop here. If anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to take the questions now.